the semi-finals of the Singapore Secondary Schools Debating Championships. My name is Brendan Lian and I will be your chairman for this evening. Seated next to me is Jonathan Yap, who will be our timekeeper. This debate is part of Division 1. What you are about to watch is a style of debate which encourages a high level of exchange and engagement between the two teams. Each speaker will have 6 minutes to make their speech. After 1 minute, the timekeeper will signal once, like this. After this sound, the debaters on the other team may offer points of information to the speaker. Debaters must stand up when they offer points of information. The speaker holding the floor may choose to accept or decline a point when it is offered. At the 5-minute mark, the timekeeper will again signal once, like this. After this sound, no more points of information may be offered for the rest of the speech. At the 6-minute mark, the timekeeper will make a double signal, like this. After this sound, the speaker must conclude within a few seconds. After the 6 main speeches, each team will have the opportunity to make a 3-minute reply speech. This can be made by either the first or second speaker on the team. No points of information are allowed during reply speeches. The opposition will make their reply speech first. The semi-final round of the Singapore Secondary Schools Debating Championships is a short preparation round. The two teams you will be watching tonight were given the motion for the debate only 1 hour ago. Before the debate begins, the audience are reminded to switch off all handphones, pagers, and anything else which might disturb the debaters. Should you need to exit or re-enter the room for any reason during the debate, please wait until the end of a speech to do so. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce the adjudicators for this evening's debate. They are Mr. Cornelius Singh, Ms. Natalie Tan, and Ms. Nur Hamida. In proposition for this evening, we have Catholic High School. Their first speaker is Sean Lee. Their second speaker is Kieran Lee. And their third speaker is Goh Han Yang. And in opposition this evening, we have St. Joseph's Institution. Their first speaker is Dylan Raj Singh. Their second speaker is Vedant Chauhan. And their third speaker is Andrew Mark. The motion for tonight's debate is, this House believes that elite sportsmen should receive government funding. And without further ado, I invite the first speaker of the proposition to open the debate. Please welcome Sean Lee.
I'm sure everyone here actually celebrated when Tao got 5th in the 2008 Olympics, because sport is not just what happens in the swimming pools, it's more than that, and we're going to prove to you why it's so important and it deserves government funding. So some definitions for today. Firstly, by elite sportsmen, we're referring to the top 3 athletes in each sporting category who are actually good enough to actually represent their country in international competitions. We're talking about people who base their sporting career as their full-time professional career, and in the vast majority of cases, these are people who actually sacrifice countless of hours in other aspects of their life and their studies. We're also talking about people who actually dedicated countless of hours every single day so that they can train in the pool, the ring, or the court, so that one day they can represent their country and recognize it's important to recognize that these are elite sportsmen. We give you an example of Tao Li, who spun the entire continent when she attained 5th in the Olympic Games, and Feng Tianwei, who led the 2008 Olympic table tennis team Singapore to the first Olympic medal in 50 years. Now, by government funding, we're basically referring to government money given to support and provide top-class training programs and overseas stints for these athletes. So thank you, sir. For example, we're talking about people like Jasmine Sir, who went to London to train for 3 months with elite sportsmen of a category so that she can improve her overall performance. Now, the burden of proof is simple. Both sides have proved that elite sportsmen qualify for government funding, and more importantly, government funding for elite sportsmen brings benefits to the country. Onto proposition policy. We have a few clauses. Firstly, strict criteria will be set by the Sports Organisation Committee to assess whether an individual qualifies for elite sportsman funding. For example, give an example of Singapore, where the Singapore National Olympic Council, led by Deputy Prime Minister Goh Han Yang, actively assess who deserves government funding or not. More than that, what are these criteria like? We're talking about criteria such as the past sporting achievement of these individuals, future sporting potential, their public image and their values, and their dedication to these sports categories individually. Now, we recognize that the funding from the government towards the sports association of each individual country will still continue regardless of our policy. No, thank you, sir. And this means that normal athletes who actually don't qualify to become elite sportsmen will still get their funding from the sports association, but just not directly from the government, and at a smaller sum. Onto the substantive argument for proposition, I'll be proving to you as to why it's justified for government to fund elite sports, and my second speaker will be telling you about how it empowers young athletes, it empowers young talents and sportsmen alike. So firstly, on why it's justified for government to fund elite sports. Ladies and gentlemen, let's just ask ourselves, when does the government fund something? Ladies and gentlemen, the government actually funds something when it's recognized that there's a social good in that funding. We give an example of things like healthcare, parks or schools, because it's a recognized inherent benefit to society. And we also recognize that while not every single person in society, no thank you sir, benefits from such social funding, the vast majority benefits and hence it deserves to be a social good. The second clause is this. As to why elite sportsmen qualify, the reason is very simple. Because we're talking about competitive sports that actually transcends all boundaries in the country, regardless of whatever race or religion you come from. More than that, sporting and elite sportsmen in international competition is actually more a bonding agent for society, where sports is a unifying element for all people. And we're talking about these cases, especially so in athletes that actually represent their country. And ladies and gentlemen, we put to you that when the government funds an elite sportsman, we do three things. First, we give them better ability to excel, such as when they can go for more international overseas training stints, such as sprinters going for high altitude locations so they can improve their performance. No, thank you, sir. Or things like more sports science technology to apply it to them so that we can better analyze their results and how to improve from there. And thirdly, they have more resources to actually improve holistically as an individual. So, when an international sportsman actually compete, we're not just talking about a single Ryan Lochte or Usain Bolt, but we're talking about the entirety of the United States and Jamaica competing for the very same competition, for the very same glory, for the very same medal. Because they're all in this together, because this results in every single person from their country wanting their country to win, because a win in that medal is a win for the country. To give an example, when Singapore table tennis team actually won the silver medal, there was a massive outpouring of euphoria. And we also give you the example of Kim Yoona of Korea, which actually failed to attain the gold medal by skating. There was a massive outpouring of emotions, when many people talked and actually were talking about conspiracy theories that existed, and many people submitted a petition demanding for a rematch. Before I move on, any points of information? Okay. So we recognize that it's not just sport lovers that actually love sports, but more importantly, the whole country actually comes together when these kind of sporting achievements actually come about. So we put to you that these kinds of sportsmen in these kinds of arena actually give national recognition towards a country, because when they win, it's equivalent to the entire country winning, because it's not just the athletes winning medal, it's more of how the entire country is coming together. To give you an example of how many people don't actually know about Jamaica, but it's only when Usain Bolt continuously win medals under the name of Jamaica that people start to recognize that Jamaica is important and we start to know where Jamaica is at the atlas. So, now on my last tier, on the duty of the nation to these sportsmen. Ladies and gentlemen, we recognize that the government has a principal duty to these sportsmen because these are elite sportsmen in the vast majority of cases who sacrifice their studies, their social life, and every single other aspect of their life to train. We put to you that these are people who are training when other people are sleeping. These are people who are training when other people are eating. These are people who are training when other people are going out to say, watch a movie. And more importantly, these are people who, in every single waking moment of their lives, are constantly thinking and practicing and watching their sport so that they can know how to improve, so that one day they have the opportunity to be able to represent their country. And towards such individuals who say, wake up at 5 AM every day to go to the ring, to train for another 16 hours so that they can just sleep late, so that for the next day they can once again repeat this entire routine, so that one day they'll be the best in their category. We think it's fundamentally, principally obligatory, and more importantly, important for the government to actually fund these people so that they can actually go into the international arena, represent their country, and more importantly, be able to repay the kind of sacrifices they made towards sporting itself. So ladies and gentlemen, recognize that while these are important, it's extremely important because it qualifies for funding from the government to allow these people to go out and represent the nation. So essentially, what I'm showing today, I show you two things. Firstly, that sports act as a social glue and a social good to society to bond the people regardless of their backgrounds. And secondly, it's principally justified for the governments to fund them for all these reasons because it's principally justified and it's practically great for society. Step outside the house, team proposition.
The speaker spoke for 6 minutes and 18 seconds.
I thank the first proposition speaker for his speech, and now to open the case for the opposition, I call upon Dylan Raj Singh.
When a government gives funding to an elite sportsman, it is diverting limited resources to train a sportsman who is at the pinnacle of its achievement. By rewarding an athlete directly for his success through a simple monetary bonus to an athlete that wins a medal, and training the next generation of athletes by giving them this funding, we will be utilizing the money entrusted by the people to the government better, and that's what we'll stand for today. Now, we believe that Team Proposition has a burden today to prove to us that by giving funding to entire athletes, it will significantly benefit the non-elite of that country, the sports scene, and society as a whole. Now, I will be arguing about how our side encourages more development of sports, and my second speaker, Vedant, will be arguing about the government's usage of funds. As a team, ladies and gentlemen, we will prove to you that funds diverted means talents undeveloped. Now, before I move on to my constructive matter, 2 points of contention with the proposition's first speech today. My first point of contention is on the entire idea of how it's justified for the government to fund sport, and my second point of contention is on the rather creative policy that we've received today. Moving on to my first point of contention. Ladies and gentlemen, they told us that funding elite sportsmen gives us social good in society. It benefits everyone, just like healthcare, parks and school. But we disagree, because it doesn't really benefit the huge majority of athletes who are still training. It doesn't really benefit the huge majority of athletes who are still training in the ring 24/7, sacrificing their sleep, just because they didn't get the funds to say hire a coach. Now, they said that the vast majority benefits under their policy. But, ladies and gentlemen, elite sportsmen aren't the vast majority of a country's sports people, and I've already told you that. And now, lastly, they said that it gives them better ability to excel by training in high altitude, for example, and by increasing sports, technology, and all that. Well, we say that these elite sportsmen will already have huge amounts of money from their sponsors, from the advertisements that they do, from the sponsors that give them their apparel, and they'll have huge amounts of money from there already, so they don't really require the funding to go to, say, Ethiopia to train in high altitude. They already have that funding, ladies and gentlemen. And lastly, on this point, now, not the entirety of the US and Jamaica is going to be interested in who wins the sport. Only those really interested in the sporting scene itself will be interested, and that's something that they denied today. Now, so ladies and gentlemen, briefly on to my second point of contention on the very interesting policy that they've given us today. Ladies and gentlemen, they said that they would still continue to fund non-elite sportsmen, but would divert most of the funds to elite sportsmen. Well, we don't see why, because these non-sportsmen are the ones that need the funding in the first place. They are the ones who need the money to say hire a coach, to say get more training sessions, to do all those kind of things. Not the elite sportsmen, they already have that, and we don't see why they give them to those sportsmen, ladies and gentlemen. We just don't understand why. And quickly moving on to my first substantive on how their side encourages greater amounts of undeveloped talent. Ladies and gentlemen, the thesis of this argument is that governments have limited funds, and thus can't develop their sporting scene under their model. Now, the funds given to these elite athletes under their model could in fact be given to people who need the training, but instead these people are neglected. Here we refer to training, developing and talented young sportsmen, maybe about my age as well. And now, when an athlete wins a race, he already gets a grand, handsome sum of money in a grand, handsome sum of money. And ladies and gentlemen, this is further raised when they have their own private sponsors like Nike, like Adidas, for example, to give them their apparel. Yes, sir.
Nike only sponsors Tiger Woods. This means that other elite sportsmen who don't fall under the very same category of sponsorship do not have the ability to train for these kind of excellence you so talked about.
Sir, you're not understanding what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that elite sportsmen can get loads of money because of the companies that allow them to wear their logo. When a person wears an Adidas logo over a Nike logo, he gets the money from Adidas. When they do advertisements, they get money through that as well. And that's what I'm trying to say, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, the elite athletes have super amounts of funding as compared to those young developing athletes who just need a little bit of money to further their training. And instead of giving it to that young man, proposition would pass it to the sportsman who already has a group of coaches and private sponsors to support himself or herself. Now, because these developing sportsmen are not recognized yet, meaning they haven't won nearly as many medals as, say, Usain Bolt or another elite sportsman, they aren't even given the opportunity to get the recognition that they so speak of. We give them the opportunity to benefit themselves and get their recognition that they deserve and they work so hard for. Now, I'd like to note at this juncture that the elite sportsman may or may not use the funding given in his line of work. Sportsmen may grow complacent and maybe just use this money to buy a few more Rolexes or just some gifts for the wife and kids instead of using it for their own training. And the nature of sports is such that a career can end maybe after 5 years of representation. After these, when these athletes retire, there are no more athletes to replace them, and thus no more athletes to become elite because all the funding, or rather most of the funding, went to the elite of that generation itself. Now the sports success of their country declines instantaneously, and all because their young developing athlete didn't get the funds that he was supposed to get. Ladies and gentlemen, because of all these reasons, we say, go with team opposition today. Thank you.
The speaker spoke for 6 minutes and 13 seconds.
I thank the first opposition speaker for his speech, and now to continue the case for the proposition, I call upon Kieran Lee.
Before I transition to my positive matter, 2 points of attention. First, what's the effect of sports on the country? Second, do these athletes need such funding? First point of contention, what's the effect of sports on the country? Our first speaker was very clear on this. Sports has a unique ability to unite the nation. Because when you see a sportsman from your country standing on an international stage, fighting with every breath to ensure that his country attains the glory it deserves, we say that every member of that society takes pride in that fact. He gave you examples like Kim Yuna and Usain Bolt. Examples they never rebutted. Instead, they told us this: only a certain members of society will feel proud. This isn't true. Every member feels proud because of the sense of national identity that happens whenever a person from a particular country is representing his country on an international stage. Because people feel proud of their country. Because people understand that this young man running on the track is representing his country, attaining glory for that country. And based on that premise upon nationality, we think everyone in society, if not the vast majority of individuals, will feel proud of such individuals. With that, second point of contention, do these athletes need such funding? Here let's deal with a substantive argument, their rebuttal to Sean's point. Their rebuttal was this, that these athletes don't need the money because they're already corporate sponsors. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we need to recognize that Adidas and Nike don't sponsor every single elite sportsman. Instead of what they've been trying to mischaracterize, they only support and sponsor a very few elite sportsmen. Why is this the case? They sponsor the only people with the highest name recognition internationally. Because ultimately, companies like Adidas and Nike are international brands. That's why, say, in the sport of swimming, they won't sponsor people like Tao Li or Joseph Schooling, but instead sponsor people like Michael Phelps. And based on this, we say that this defeats the entire rebuttal to our argument. These elite sportsmen do need this funding despite corporate sponsorship. But the substantive argument was this, that we are diverting money from other athletes. Let's make a policy clarification here. We're not diverting money from aspiring athletes in order to fund our policy. Instead, we are asking government to channel additional funds to the training of such professional athletes. Our second response is this. We think that such a policy will incentivize more young athletes they talk about to do well. Why is this the case? Because it sends a strong societal message on the part of the government that sports is something worth pursuing. As I'll be elaborating I'll be elaborating further on in my substantive. Because in status quo, many people in society think that sports isn't something worth pursuing, that you should pursue your academic degrees first rather than do sports. And we say when the government comes out and says to these professional athletes, we will support your funding, your training if you do well, we think it inspires these young athletes to train even harder in order to gain the kind of recognition, the kind of funding they deserve. With that, I'll now transition to my positive matter on how we empower young talented sportsmen. Because we see a problem in status quo, where many young talented sportsmen face a severe dilemma when choosing whether or not to go into elite sports. When at the crossroads at age 16 to 18, they feel rather conflicted whether or not to pursue sports, their passion, or as an elite sportsman, or rather more conventional choices such as an education and a job. And even if they do want to pursue such sports, they often choose not to. Because the lack of government support for these talents means that they're often going to end up as mediocre athletes rather than the champions they aspire to be. Because in status quo, they're under the wing of national sporting associations. And the problem with this is that these national sporting associations have to cater for many athletes. For instance, the United States Swimming Association has to cater for 3,000 athletes. Hence, limited support means that they don't have the opportunity to fully exploit this potential and talent that they have. They may be able to go for extra training sessions with the coach, but not the overseas stint and overseas training camp that they deserve in order to fully exploit their talents for themselves and for their country. And we say that lacking funding is a very significant issue, because without funding, they face the possibility of becoming just another mediocre athlete, where they're essentially wasting their talent. Talent they worked so hard in the teenage years. I'll take you in a moment. They worked so hard in the teenage years to cultivate. But before I go on, yes.
You aren't really incentivizing the developing athletes because they must train with funds that are less than all the elite athletes until they become elite, and so they can't really train properly.
Sir, once again, we're not diverting funds away from other athletes. We're just channeling more funds to these elite athletes who deserve such funds because they work for their country and they achieve for their country. Hence, many parents don't want their children to go into sports because it's considered an unconventional choice or career. And the lack of funding creates the possibility of them being mediocre. Rather, they want these children to go into more conventional choices, such as pursuing an education, a job, despite their talent. We give you an example of Nicole and Tabitha Lee, who despite their talent in gymnastics, left the sport because of the lack of government funding and the strong possibility of them just being another gymnast rather than a champion. This infringes on the choice of these young talents, because even though they want to pursue sports and their passion, they can't. This is because there's a huge risk to pursuing sports, where they may end up mediocre and forgotten. Hence, the calculus of such athletes is that they want to pursue whatever has a higher chance of success. How does our policy improve this? With government funding, these athletes can fully exploit their talents, where it increases the chances of success in sports. Hence, they're empowered with the free choice whether or not to pursue sports as a professional career. There's no more this huge dilemma they face when they choose whether or not to go into the elite teams. The significance of free choice is this, that people are very passionate about their sport, that they have a huge potential to achieve. And we say that these people do indeed deserve the free choice that our side empowers them. So for all these reasons, I've been pretty proud to stand in proposition.
The speaker spoke for 6 minutes and 17 seconds.
I thank the second proposition speaker for his speech. And now to continue the case for the opposition, I call upon Vedant Chauhan.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have two main points of contention today. Firstly, on the entire idea on the effect of sports, and secondly, on their idea about athletes being confused and not being incentivized to go ahead and take part in sports. So, firstly, they have come up here and given us the idea about sports uniting a nation. We do not disagree. We agree that sports does unite a nation. Sports does bring a country together. However, we do not understand why giving bonuses or giving government funding to these elite athletes will bring a country together. Because we believe that if an athlete has succeeded, if an athlete has excelled in a certain sport, he or she can still bring a country to fame. He or she can excel. For example, Usain Bolt, when he has excelled, he has already received many sponsors. He has been given the amount of money from different sponsorships. When he has received gold medals, his country has funded him with money. So this money can be used to excel. Thus, we do not feel why you have to take taxpayers' money.
Sir.
No, thank you, sir. You have to take people's money to spend on these elite athletes who have already succeeded. These elite athletes who have already made their mark. Secondly, moving on their idea about Adidas, about their misconception about Adidas not sponsoring all athletes, Nike not sponsoring all athletes. We agree. Adidas and Nike do not sponsor all athletes. No, thank you, sir. But that is not our point. Our point here is not to only bring two companies in and sponsor athletes. Our point here is there are many companies out there. There are many sports brands out there who will want to have their logo on athletes, which is why there will be other companies who will approach these small athletes, in fact, they will approach these elite athletes to enhance their brand and to sponsor their brand, as small brands will more of a move towards these elite athletes, as if these elite athletes are on their full camera, then this means that their brand will be seen throughout the world, which is why we believe that, hold the information, sir. No, thank you, sir. We believe that at the end of the day, they still have a lot of funds to run their career through sponsorships. So, about the idea about diverting money, they came up here and said that they'll be diverting money to Sports Association. In fact, they'll be diverting more money to the Sports Association to develop breeding talent. But we say they're in a world which assumes that money is something which they can receive in a click of a hand. But we disagree. The money which the government receives is from the people as a whole, is from the taxpayers, which is why the money is constrained. The money is not something which is so free, which is why the government has to be very wise and apply this money. No, thank you, sir. So if you look in our world, the money which we use is to spend on developing these young talents, developing these potential talents, as we feel that these elite sportsmen have already received their funds, which is why we believe that their world will be spending extra money and we're wasting the government, sir. No, thank you, sir. We're wasting their people's resources. Thus, we believe that we should be instead using these resources to benefit the country as a whole. So, on the idea about athletes being confused and lack of support, no, thank you, sir. We've already seen in Singapore on how our government has already put up advertisements to show how we should support our country in sport. We should support our young talents. We already have youth games, no, thank you, sir, who enhance these youth sports. And they give us the example of a parent not being encouraged and they are assuming that a parent will only send their child only if they receive funds. Because they are assuming that when a child receives funds, he will ensure and he will surely exceed in the sport. But we like to say that sports is an area where it's the survival of the fittest. It is only the best of the best, it's only the best of the best who survive in this industry. Which is why we say that even if you fund 50 athletes with this amount of money, at the end of the day, perhaps 3 or 4 actually make it out, who have put in effort and who have worked hard with using their resources. And we'd like to tell you that these elite athletes have reached this position not with state funding, but in fact by putting in effort and proving to the world that they deserve to be on this platform. So, moving on to my substantive about how the government funds, about the government funds and its usage. The thesis of this point is that the government gains its funds from taxpayers. So, sir. Yes, sir.
You just said that these people reach to the international arena because of government funding. Because they had funding previously. It's precisely because of this kind of funding that we call government funding that provides the source.
So these athletes who reach this elite stature and all have put in effort. These athletes have already worked hard as a whole, which is why they are, and also in our world they will be funded, they will be given money to benefit as a whole. So, however, in your world they will receive extra money, in which I've already shown you that this extra money might not necessarily be used, and it will be a wastage, as at the end of the day, not all will succeed. So moving on. What we say is that the government is the government's duty to spend this hard-earned money, no thank you sir, to benefit the country as a whole. So, the amount of money which is in the government funds has to be obtained from the payers, from normal citizens who entrust the money with the state to spend it on something beneficial. So, if the government uses this money on elite sportsmen, this will lead to a bad response from the people as elite sportsmen may not be accepted by the entire public as a whole. Thus, this will be a scenario where it is inappropriate usage of funds and for the government to spend on an athlete who is already being rewarded, on an athlete who has already received his fame and achievements, and on an athlete who has already received sponsorships for being the best. So, the government is under a burden to fulfill the interests of the people outside, fulfill the duty of the state. We are taking into account the majority and assisting them. We believe that the money should be spent on perhaps, if the country is interested in developing their sports, the money could be spent in developing potential athletes, like my first speaker has said. However, if the country does not see sports as an entire area to develop, and if the country is not well developed, the government should use the money correctly and spend the money on areas such as on education, on areas such as transport system, which is why we believe that you walk beside opposition, as we have shown you how the government should use the government's funds as a whole and respect the sports idea as a whole. Thank you.
The speakers spoke for 6 minutes and 11 seconds.
I thank the second opposition speaker for his speech, and now to continue the case for the proposition, I call upon Goh Han Yang.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to be asking 3 simple questions for today. Firstly, is it an improper usage of funds? Well, I'll give directly to the second speaker's substantive. Second, is this funds better allocated for non-elite sportsmen? And thirdly, an entire idea about how elite sportsmen, do these elite sportsmen really need these sponsors? Let's get the first idea. Is there improper usage of funds? When there's at the House today asserted that simply because we are supporting these athletes now there will be a massive social backlash because of an improper usage of funds. We think this is an assertion. Why so? Because we think that if anything, society actually supports the usage of funds to help these elite athletes. That's why we think an entire nation banded together to want to help Joseph Schooling for his NS deferment so that he could concentrate solely on his 2016 Olympics bid to win a medal. That is why we don't think that there will be any social backlash to even exist. But if anything, we think that the social backlash is far greater on their side of the House when they allocate disproportionate amounts of money to athletes that have a lower chance of succeeding than elite athletes. This is when the social backlash is going to be far greater. That is what we think constitutes an improper usage of funds. But more importantly, we think it's blasphemous for them to tell us that just because you spend money on elite athletes, that means they will not spend money on sports and healthcare. We don't think so. That if for every governmental policy, certain amount of money is allocated on sports, certain amount of money is allocated on transport. We don't think these two things are mutually exclusive. We think that you can fund and boost transport infrastructure as well as sports. We think it's fundamentally a fallacy on their side of the House. But let's get a second idea, ladies and gentlemen. Which side of the House better benefits non-elite sportsmen? When it failed to deal with Sean's entire clarification in his policy, that we still support non-elite sportsmen, that we still recognize that non-elite sportsmen will still want help, and that's why we're still offering fundings to NSAs and allowing NSAs to fund these non-elite sportsmen, right? But what was their side of the House talking about? But even if you agree that we're not helping this non-elite sportsmen, we think it's why is it still okay? Because we think let's look at non-elite sportsmen. They're often okay simply with funding from the national organization or their association alone. Why? Because many of these non-elite sportsmen haven't become like that competitive and that good yet to want to need funds to go for overseas competitions like the Olympics, for example, like the Asian Games, for example. What they need is to build up their foundations first. What they need is to spend countless amounts of hours in the pool first, for example, to be able to even want to go overseas, to build the foundations to become an elite sportsman, to want to be able to qualify for this,
you want to be able to qualify for this funding in the very first place. That was what Kieran told him. And that is why Kieran told this idea that if anything, we offer these non-elite sportsmen a further incentive to want to become an elite sportsman so they can qualify for funding, so they can train harder. But more importantly, ladies and gentlemen, we need to realize that the criteria for offering funding is not simply based on an idea of need, that I need money and therefore you should be funding me, because we think that governments don't act as a charity. What the criteria for offering funding is this, that there must be a certain amount of social good. And we argue, no thank you sir, the elite sportsmen have the greatest amount of social good, because it is these elite sportsmen that can do well, it is these elite sportsmen that have the highest potential for success, it is these elite sportsmen that can put the country on the international map. It is people like, for example, Joseph Schooling, that have the potential to help Singapore garner a first Olympic medal in men's swimming in, like, for example, forever, right? We think it is these types of elite sportsmen that have the greatest amount of social goods as compared to other sportsmen that we think, that's why we think the criteria for offering funding is that we must give them more funding than others. But more importantly, it's also because they have a higher chance of succeeding, right? And that's why we think taxpayers' money is better allocated to offer people who have a higher chance of succeeding. But more importantly, we think this idea of a problem also exists on their side of the house. Why? Because if they don't allow for funding for this elite sportsmen, they offer funding only to this National Sports Association. We think that these National Sports Associations are still going to allocate the bulk of the resources to elite athletes like Joseph Schooling, because they realize that when athletes like Joseph Schooling do well, their own National Sports Associations, it reflects better on themselves as a whole. That's why we think that the problems are not exclusive. But if anything, we think that there will be a trickle-down effect from this elite